do know Tracy, yeah. Okay, yeah, okay, yeah. Okay. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. We got we got visual too? Oh, cool. Yes. All right. Magnificent. Good afternoon. Welcome to the 8th of December DDRC meeting here at City Hall. Thank you for your patience. We're going to call the meeting to order at this time. The commission is made up of volunteers with expertise or interest in historic preservation and design. We generally meet on the second Thursday of the month to review cases. The commission is supported by the city's urban planning and historic preservation staff who are here today. Please let them know if you have any questions, taking care not to impede the proceedings. The meeting generally proceeds with staff calling the case and describing it. The applicant may also come forward to add to the basic description of the request if necessary. If so, please try to keep your presentation to less than 10 minutes. The commissioners will then have the opportunity to ask questions. After this period, I will ask if there is anyone in the audience who wishes to speak for or against the proposal, and audience comments shall be kept to 2 minutes per person. If there is, the applicant will have an opportunity to respond, and then that rebuttal shall be kept to 5 minutes. In most of the cases, we will make a decision tonight after all information has been presented. If your case is denied, or if you feel that your decision was made in error, you and anyone with standing have the opportunity to appeal it within 30 days of the decision. All decisions of this commission are based on existing guidelines and ordinances. If you plan to speak about a specific project, you must have signed in. The sheet is at the back of the room or at the podium, I believe. Please note that these meetings are streamed live, recorded now, and broadcast. So please use discretion with any personal information you choose to share in the course of the proceedings. All motions and decisions are made while applying all of the facts to all of the guidelines. Will all parties who plan to present or speak at the in this proceeding please stand and raise your right hand? Do you affirm to tell the truth in these proceedings? Thank you. You may see it. Will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Bachnight? Here. Ms. Great?
Here.
Mr. Heiler?
Here.
Mr. Cohn? Here. Mr. Savory? Here. Mr. Nguyen?
Here?
We have quorum.
Very good, thank you. Does the agenda still stand?
We've had a few changes since publication. Under the consent agenda, item number 3, 2150 Hardin Street, the kitchen, which was a request for a recommendation for landmark designation, has been withdrawn. Likewise, under the regular agenda, 1409 Hughie Street, which is a request for a certificate of site plan approval as well as a certificate for design approval for new construction of a mixed-use development in the City Center Design Development District has been deferred. And 2307 Wayne Street, a request for design approval for changes to new construction in Elmwood Park Planned Unit Development has been withdrawn.
Thank you. The Design Development Review Commission uses a consent agenda to approve non-controversial or routine matters by a single motion and vote. Examples of such items include residential site improvements such as fences, minor exterior changes, or signage. If a member of the DDRC or the general public wishes to discuss an item on the consent agenda at the beginning of the meeting, that item is removed from the consent agenda and considered during the meeting. The DDRC then approves the remaining consent agenda items. Would you read the consent agenda, please?
Certainly. The first item is 2150 Hardin Street, the female dining hall, which is a request for a recommendation for landmark designation. And likewise, there is a request for the corresponding male dining hall, also on the Bull Street campus. Included in the consent agenda would be approval of the November 2016 minutes.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone wishing to remove an item from the consent agenda? There being none, is there a motion to accept the consent agenda as it is?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Roll, please, for a vote.
Mr. Bachnight? Ms. Great?
Yes.
Mr. Heiler? Mr. Cohn? Mr. Savory?
Yes.
Mr. Nguyen?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. That includes the agenda or the minutes of the previous meeting, correct?
That's right.
Very good, thank you. That moves us now to the regular agenda. And we'll have Lucinda Statler please present the case.
The next case on the agenda is 818 Elmwood Avenue. This is in the City Center Design Development District, a request for certificate of design approval for new construction. This site is currently Lizard's Thicket Dine-In Restaurant with drive-through facility at the southwest corner of Elmwood and Lincoln. The applicant's plans include tearing down the current building and rebuilding a new restaurant facility of the same use. The restaurant in its current form has been in this location for several decades. The site plan does not meet the City Center Design Development guidelines. While renovating the current building would allow for the restaurant to remain in its current location and keep the drive-through due to its grandfather status, new construction requires that the new building come into compliance with the current ordinance and guidelines. Staff has been working with the applicant to try to find a site plan solution which meets the guidelines while also accommodating the applicant's desire to accommodate a drive-through and the convenient parking for customers. At this time, none of the solutions that were derived that meet the guidelines have been satisfactory to the applicant. And with that, I'll just turn it over to Ted Talmadge. He's the architect, and he'll be presenting the project.
Thank you, Ms. Statler.
Thank you. My name is Ted Talmadge, Talmadge Architects. Thicket this afternoon, asking that you favorably consider our request to tear down the existing building and build a new one. This is the overhead view of the existing facility. The current building we estimate to be between 30 and 40 years old. It was acquired in the mid-'80s, and it was a chicken biscuit restaurant of some sort before that. We're not really sure how long they existed. But the building at this point is just basically worn out. The roof needs to be replaced. The heat and air conditioning system needs to be replaced. The commercial kitchen is too small to keep up with the demand load in the dining room. The dining room is too small to keep up with the demand load of the customers. It's just outdated, worn-out building. We considered renovation, but the renovation of that building just would not correct all the issues that the old building presented. The current building is about 3,700 square feet heated. We propose a new building that would be 5,600 square feet heated, so it would, by nature of the code, then be a fully sprinklered building. This is a comparison of the Lizard Thicket property to the McDonald's property down the street. Obviously, both businesses have perfected the art of delivering their services to their clientele. What's striking is how similar both of these site plans are to one another. So it's because of this, the similarities, and also knowing that previously you approved the site plan for McDonald's, that we propose to use McDonald's as sort of a template for our design of the site and of the building. So this is our site plan. Apologize, it's upside down just so it's oriented the same way as the previous slides. But the building is pushed forward to the setback requirement of the zoning ordinance, 20 feet from the Elmwood Avenue right-of-way. This is 6.5 feet closer to the right-of-way than the existing building currently is. The setback from Elmwood Avenue obviously complies with the zoning ordinance, and we believe it complies with section 5.4.1 of the design guidelines. In that, the building falls well within the average building setbacks of the adjacent properties and on this block and on the adjacent blocks. So what we're doing is we're proposing a pedestrian access, or actually entry point, similar to McDonald's on Elmwood Avenue, which is right up against the sidewalk there, with a pedestrian pathway consisting of pavers that delivers pedestrians to the front entry porch. And then along the property lines of Elmwood Avenue and Lincoln Street, we propose a 30-inch high fence and landscaping feature, very similar to what was done down the street at McDonald's. So the site plan has been reviewed by the zoning department. At first there was consideration that we might need a special exception for the drive-through. However, they have since ruled that that's not going to be an issue since it's so close to where it currently is. So at this point, the zoning department has no issues that we need to resolve at this point. So this is just another comparison, the overview, but this time with the new building dropped in, comparing it again to the McDonald's down the street. So this is a floor plan of the building. Really just trying to show you the proximity relative of the dining rooms and the entry porch relative to the new entry feature there on Elmwood Avenue and Elmwood Avenue itself. So you can see the pavers extend right to the front porch and around to the front door. This is the rendering of the building. The view is taken from the entry drive from Elmwood Avenue. we have introduced large windows throughout all the dining spaces on the first floor, which was a staff recommendation. We've also accentuated the two-story element with the addition of upper-level windows, which again was a recommendation by the staff. We've also added brick to the exterior of the building and the vertical elements, which we feel provides a more urban aesthetic that was in the prototype. So we'll quickly just run around the building here in the elevations. We have calculated the glazing percentage on both floors, both levels. The exterior building finishes materials consist of brick, painted hardy plank siding, and standing seam metal roof. That flat portion that you'll see around the building as we proceed is a parapet that hides the mechanical equipment on the roof. The two side elevations, the top one is taken from the entrance drive from Elmwood Avenue. To the left is the dining half of the building with the larger windows and the two-story element. And then on the right of the end of the elevation, you'll see that's where the commercial kitchen exists. On the lower elevation, again, Elmwood Avenue, excuse me, would be to the right with a two-story element there at the corner of facing Elmwood and Lincoln Street. And then the center portion there, the vertical element, is where the drive-through window is. And then at the back of the building there to the left, we propose adding faux windows, false windows, where the commercial kitchen exists. This is the rear elevation of the building, where to the left of that, to the left door is where the electric meters and disconnects will be. So this is just a little snapshot of where we started the prototype and with the input from staff and other recommendations and issues that we thought we needed to address. This is kind of where the building has developed and evolved. This is just a little information on the windows, the muntins that we propose, and the brick that we propose using. Our landscape plan, to the right, you'll see how we've calculated all the credits required, 27 credits, are provided through additional landscaping. The trees along the property lines consist mostly of live oaks, willow oaks, elm trees, and ligustrum. We are keeping several large crepe myrtles along the rear property line. So we're back to the rendering of the building. At this point in time, I'd just like to read a couple letters we received from neighborhood associations affected by this project.
Has staff seen these? Okay, thank you.
The first one is from Arsenal Hill Neighborhood Association. It reads, Dear Ted, I want to thank you for arranging the meeting for myself and Jonathan Comish last Thursday to review the plans and the completed renovation of the Lizard's Thicket on Elmwood Avenue, which lies within the boundaries of Arsenal Hill neighborhood. We have communicated with our members and our leadership, who have all agreed with your plans and support the proposed construction of Lizard's Thicket on Elmwood Avenue. We wish you all the best, look forward to frequenting your establishment once complete. Sincerely, Cliff Spann, President, Arsenal Hill Neighborhood Association. The second one came in from the Downtown Neighborhood Association, and it reads, I am pleased to write in support of the design and location of the proposed new building for Lizard's Thicket on Elmwood. I think the design is lovely and fits well with the neighborhood. I am glad they are planning to keep the drive-through at the area on the side of the building. I hope they will receive full approval and proceed with the demolition and construction soon. Sincerely, Terry Davis, President of the Downtown Neighborhood Association. So with that, I guess we take questions.
Yes, we will. Any addition from staff? No?
So
Please.
I have a couple of questions. The first is what we're actually approving. So this is for certificate of design approval, not site plan, correct?
Well, yeah, the projects that require a separate motion for site plan approval have to either be a certain size, which is like over 100,000 square feet, or have residential components. Okay. But the site plan guidelines are part of the design approval. Okay. So, but yeah, it's one motion, one approval.
Okay. So then I have a specific question on the glazing. So if you go back to the slide where you have the calculations on the front of the facade,
Yes.
so 51% glazing, I'm assuming you're only calculating that brick portion and not the hardy plank that runs the rest of the length of the building?
That's correct.
Okay. So,
Excuse me, that hardy plank section is really pushed back another 10 to 12 feet probably from the front face of the brick face.
okay.
Any other questions from commission? In reference to a setback, you stated, sir, and I'm not going to try to quote you here, but to simply get some explanation here, the proposed setback is 20 feet, I believe? Is that correct?
That's correct.
And yet the average around or along Elmwood is about 18 feet, from what we've been led to understand. Is that not so?
I do not know, to be honest with you. Viewing the project location, from satellite view, it would appear to me, I don't know how 18 was developed, but it would appear that we are further ahead than most buildings on that 3 or 4 block section of Elmwood Avenue. And we're moving it even further closer. So
Yeah, the way that that's calculated, technically, the zoning office would be calculating the setbacks and determining the averages. Staff did some, preliminary measurements on our GIS software, just to try to get, really what we're more concerned about is the appropriateness of the setback, but, the technical measurements will be done by the zoning administrator in his office, so we got adjacent blocks, how far do you go? Is it, both sides of the street? That was sort of the average that we got. It's pretty close to what the average is, 18, 20.
So setback does have some inference in terms of the overall site plan,
It
correct?
does.
Okay.
in response to your question, though, I'd like to point out the guidelines, excuse me, state that the guidelines are illustrative rather than prescriptive. And that the aim is to engender creative approaches and solutions with a workable framework rather than laying out detailed and rigid standards. And so I would ask that maybe a 2 feet difference doesn't really matter that much in that
Okay,
regard.
thank you. Mr. Sager?
Question, and I guess it's partially to staff. I think, as I understand it, it's, the concern is not so much about a foot here and a foot there with the setback, but it's the disconnection of the sidewalks from the building itself, right?
That's correct.
I think, I agree with that interpretation in the recommendation, because I agree that I don't think McDonald's is a good precedent for the reasons that are stated in the staff recommendations. I think it's unfortunate that actually ended up the way it did, because it doesn't, I agree that it doesn't meet the intent or the letter of the guidelines, and it really gets down to the disconnection between the sidewalk and the building. It's really what it gets down to, because parking's in the way in front of the building, and from an urban standpoint, I think that's not the intent of the guidelines. So I'm not saying where I fall in terms of my opinion of approval or not, but I think that is a fair statement.
May I respond?
Please.
This is the relative connection of the sidewalk to the building, and a very small driveway separates the two. I think my opinion, that's all it is, in consideration of this, is putting that building within 15 feet of a 7-lane highway would not only be a little dangerous, but would also be very uncomfortable as a dining experience in those front dining rooms and sitting on that front porch. Those cars are traveling 40 to 45 miles an hour at that point in time as they cross in front of the lizard thicket. I think the distraction and the noise and just being within 15 feet of that would be a very unpleasant experience, and certainly would affect the operation of the restaurant, profitability of it.
Very good. Any further questions or comments? Mr. Hyler, you did ask about the glazing, and I know that we have certain guidelines related to that.
I understand that you're interpreting the hardy plank portion as a parapet, but we have approved other buildings with step backs on the upper floors and have still held them to the glazing requirements or close to the glazing requirements. I think that 51% along the upper floor is not an accurate interpretation when you look at the elevation of the building.
I would
Again,
agree with
referring
that.
to the, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I think, I'd agree with your assessment of that, Ryan. Sorry.
I was just going to comment, again, referring to the guidelines, it says that usually there's a much greater window area at the storefront level for pedestrians to have a better view of the merchandise displayed behind, as opposed to upper stories, which have smaller window openings, 40%.
Agreed, but I mean, there's still some minimum recommendations, and I don't know that having that much of a blank hardy plank area falls within the intent of the guidelines. And I'd also point out that the first floor still does not quite meet the minimum recommendations. And the Lincoln Street side, I don't think would meet at all.
But it sounds like the intent of those windows is for people to view the merchandise within the buildings.
Correct. Or to create an air of activity within the buildings. And so I think, going back to the comment about disconnect with the sidewalk, you put a building 20 foot back and limit the amount of glazing, then you really are not creating any activity.
Well, I would ask you to consider the fact there's a front porch there that's wide open with all kinds of activity. And if you look at the full measure of the building straight across, that combined with the windows, there's a lot of activity being viewed there.
I have an additional thought and/or question for you. In terms of that second story setback as it is, have you considered faux windows to
The
add?
parapet,
Yes.
if that would, if you feel that would make the building look better, we would consider that. However,
That might bring you closer to the considered or required or preferred, if you will, glazing requirement, perhaps. And that might be something staff could be willing to work with you on if we had an approval. Go on.
Sidewalk. What's the distance from the building to Lincoln Street?
excuse me. About 30,
Yeah, almost 40 feet.
about 50 feet.
I think that is cause, I think, also for concern. Have you looked at any schemes that push the building to Lincoln Street and also to Elmwood? But
We have, and it's almost impossible to accommodate a drive-through window and the traffic pattern when the building is pushed to that corner like that. We've looked at it two directions. One of it turned 90 degrees, and one of them, just like it is now, pushed over 50 degrees to the property line. And if you can envision pushing it over 50 feet to the property line, there's just no way to access the drive-through. The drive-through is a very vital component of the owner's business. It's at least 50% of the business that they do in that facility.
Have you tried turning the building 90 degrees?
We did try turning the building 90 degrees to where the long side of the building was against Elmwood Avenue. It did force a very contorted way to get to the drive-through, excuse me, traffic pattern, and you had people crossing all kinds of different traffic patterns to get into the building. You also had the entrance of the building forced way over to the upper right-hand corner to where people had to walk all the way around the parking lot and the building to get to the front door. So yes, we looked at those. We tried to make those work. It's just the nature of a building with a drive-through component that made it undesirable. We just couldn't make it work.
You know, I would submit that part of the reason for design guidelines, especially in an urban core, is it's not always the easiest way to configure a building in order to make it pedestrian-oriented rather than vehicle-oriented. To me, I think it's those kind of difficult design processes are pretty critical my concern is, you know, unfortunately, one project was approved that doesn't meet the intent of the design guidelines, which is the McDonald's that you're referring to. I'm a little bit concerned about, you know, further establishing that precedent, in this case, with respect to the site orientation and the pedestrian orientation of this building. I understand the prototype, and it's not an unrecognizable kind of way to site a building, but it's also not, I don't believe, meeting the urban intent of the design guidelines because it's a building in an island of, you know, in a sea of parking. So I'm having a difficult time with that from that respect.
If I could just also put in a comment about, staff was trying to also think of different precedents that have been done. There's the Cookout you might be familiar with in Five Points, which has a drive-through but is on the street corner. So we sort of tried to do something similar with this, and the site plan, I know the engineer had drawn up a site plan based on our conversations, and it mostly worked from what I recall, but the concern was that the the people parking in the parking lot had to walk a little bit too far to get to the front door. But I feel like the drive-through was, I mean, it seemed like it was functional and there was stacking room and all that kind of stuff. So, I guess there was a compromise from the applicant's view of the functionality of the building, but it was just trying to come up with a solution to have a drive-through, but still have the building on the corner.
Well, I think that would be something reasonable for the commission to see.
There's been several mention of, both here from the commission and from you, sir, relative to the comparison to McDonald's. Staff may know this, the answer to this question. City center guidelines have come since.
No, they were in
McDonald?
place. They were in place at the time. I wasn't, but I did go back and look through the files, and it was quite a long process that did go through a number of recommended denials, and they went through a process of coming back with different ideas to try to mitigate this, that, and the other. And I mean, the whole process was 18 months long. We certainly don't want anything to take that long, but it was just, I mean, it was just sort of a back and forth. And again, I think partly the reason it was such a struggle is because there was a recognition the whole time that we don't want to set a precedent to have these, proliferate in the downtown. So.
Okay. If there's nothing else from the commission at this time, I'm going to ask if there is anybody in the audience who would like to provide any comments in terms of opposition or in favor of this application. Okay. There being none, I guess we'll have, unless there is any further discussion here, we'll ask for a motion.
Well, I'm going to make a motion largely based upon the recommendation of staff and what we discussed in terms of the intent and letter of the design guidelines, specifically with reference to the site plan, and that's That's the basis for the motion that I'm making, which is to deny approval of the application.
Thank you, Mr. Savory. Is there a second?
A second.
We have a second for denial. Any further discussion? Would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Bachnight? No. Ms. Great?
Yes.
Mr. Heiler?
Yes.
Mr. Cohn?
No.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
Mr. Nguyen?
Yes.
Motion passes
Okay.
4-2.
We thank you, folks. Certainly, if you're looking to, as I mentioned in the beginning, statements, if you want to appeal, you have a 30-day window to do so. However, I think presenting some changes to your current plan would certainly bring you back to staff and see how it moves from there. Thank you. We have an additional case, I believe. That would be 4025 Enzor Street. I'm fine, sir. Have you been sworn in?
No, sir.
Okay. Would you please raise your right hand? Do you affirm to tell the truth in these proceedings?
I do.
Very good. State your name. Well, actually, we're going to have presentation by staff, and then we'll have you come up.
Okay. So just sit back down then? or-
Yeah, you can just have a seat.
Good afternoon. This is a new construction item at 4025 Enzor Avenue, which is located in the Seminary Ridge Architectural Conservation District. Currently, this is a vacant lot because of a contributing house that unfortunately burned down a few years ago. The applicant is proposing a very similar house with similar scale and rhythm of openings and characteristics, such as a bungalow style. Most of the building complies with the guidelines. This is a photograph of the building that used to exist, and back to the proposal. A view of the angle on the side. And then this is the current proposal by the applicant. The directional expression, sense of entry, rhythm of openings, all appear to be in keeping with the guidelines. There's a question, though, about the massing due to the extension of the left or south wall onto the porch, which is better seen in this image here. Historically, the porch roof is the stopping point for the side walls, so staff is recommending it to look more like this, which is consistent with historic porches in the area. So back to the proposal, and then again, staff's recommendation. These are some historic houses on the same street in Seminary Ridge, just to note that the porch wall is consistent with the back of the porch roof, essentially. And if you need to reference the floor plans, they're here for you. Do you have any questions for staff?
No questions at this time. Sir, would you like to come forward, please? Would you like to come forward and add anything to what Stacy's presented?
No, are you asking me what I want to present?
Yes, sir.
I've just done as much as we can to design this house to represent what was there before, prior to the fire or the loss of this particular dwelling, all the way from the brick curtain wall up to the roof. Obviously, there are some upgrades in the code that make it impossible to be exact, but other than that, this house is virtually identical in that aspect. Going even a little bit farther, we made certain there was adequate parking in the rear of the house with the garage coming around. It can load on the rear side to avoid any cars or anything on the side of it. The steps will be brick, again, just as much as we can, utilizing this photograph to make it identical to the dwelling that was there prior to that. That's what our goal is going to be.
Very good. If I may, I didn't have you do it in the beginning. Would you state your name, please?
Yes, sir, it's Ron Trueblood.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from Commission of Mr. Trueblood?
Do you have any concerns or exception about pushing that wall back so that it's aligned with so that the corner's doing that at the porch?
No, I'll be able to adjust things internally on the house. That's actually a master bedroom area. I'd like it to be as large as possible. I'd rather it be that way, but it's not a concern for me. I can adjust and squeeze out some square footage in different areas inside the internal portion of the dwelling.
Very good. Is there anyone here in the audience who would like to speak in approval of or opposition to? No? Very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any further questions or discussion? We'll ask for a motion.
Based on the information submitted by staff, I make a motion that we approve, grant a certificate of design approval for new construction at 4025 Ensor Avenue with the following conditions: that the setback be in line with adjacent buildings, that the window details be worked out with staff, that the porch be fully opened with no enclosure, so to move that bedroom wall back.
Thank you. Now we have a motion to approve with recommendations or conditions. Do we have a second?
A second.
We have a second. Any further discussion? No? We'll go ahead and call the roll, please.
Mr. Bucknight? Yes. Ms. Grate?
Yes.
Mr. Heiler?
Yes.
Mr. Cohn?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
Mr. Nguyen?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much, sir. You're welcome. Is there any other business that we need to do?
I think just the introduction of new staff that you had mentioned.
Yeah, I had planned to do that. I had mentioned to commission members here present that City Council did approve 3 individuals for the positions that are becoming vacant with rotation off. 2 of whom we do know for sure, and 1 who may not yet
Well,
be.
I'm not entirely sure about all 3.
Okay. So we've had City Council provide some approval or appointments, but we're not quite sure if all 3 are going to actually accept. Okay. So, story yet to be told. We do have 2 new staff members who I know some of us have met before, but I'm going to introduce Miss Rachel Walling, please, of the Planning Department. Stand and be known. Thank you. And I guess Rachel, I was talking with her earlier, guys, is going to have kind of a territory or certain neighborhoods that she'll be working with. Okay, very good. And we also have Ms. Doreen Roy. Welcome. We welcome you guys and look forward to working with you. Very good. All right, well, if we tend to make anything look difficult, just let us know, and we'll try our best not to do it too often. I do have one other thing I'd like to bring up, and that is, along with the change in officers, we have the year ending. I've truly enjoyed being chair. I think now with the January meeting, though, it is time for a new vote and/or choice, if it's so desired. I would like to continue to serve. I'll mention that now, but we also need to vote for a vice chair coming up. So I'd like any of you present members to consider whether or not you'd like to serve in either of those 2 positions, and/or who you would like to have in those positions. And then we'll have that vote come up in January, I believe.
That's right.
Okay. And if no one has anything further, is there a motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Meeting is adjourned. We thank you.
I hope you all have a very happy holiday, so.
It worked out. There's only two, but
I thought when you said no.